Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Oh my gosh, we have a lot to talk about. Today, we're going to talk about rounding, time rounding. Now, I've been doing this for long enough that I remember when most people didn't have electronic timekeeping processes or software. So even if there was a time clock, you had to physically add up the time. So somebody comes in at 7:12, they take a lunch at 10:52, they return at 11:16, they leave for the day at 3:58. How many hours did they work? So what a lot of employers did when the math was hard was they started having rounding processes where they would say, okay, we're going to round, let's say, to the quarter hour. If you come in between 8 o'clock and 8:06, we're going to round you back to 8 o'clock. So we're going to pay you as if you got here at 8 o'clock. If you clock out at, let's say, 5:22, okay, we're going to back you up to 5:15, okay, because we're going to round on the quarter hour. So what did that mean? Well, it was all nice and tidy because it made the math easy, right? We were just looking at quarter hour increments. The problem is many times employees lose time when you are rounding. And the irony is they mostly lose time when they come late and you have to back up to the earlier time, and they leave earlier and you give them credit for the later time. So it all depends on how you set up your rounding system. But for the most part, it actually rewards people who come late and leave early. So what does that mean for you? Well, you would think that's just a performance issue, but in fact, it's also a wage hour violation these days because we have had many courts that have told us rounding isn't necessary. The only reason we think you sneaky little devil employers round is because you don't want to have to pay overtime. Think about this for a second. You schedule someone to work 8 hours. They work 8 hours and 1 minute, right? That's what the time clock would show. But when you round, you can get them down to 7 hours and 55 minutes or even down to 8 hours. Now you don't owe them overtime. But what the California Division of Labor Standards Enforcement and the California courts have said is, hey, wait a minute, you're potentially ripping off an employee. I did a wage hour audit for a client years ago with the Labor Commissioner's Office, and they wanted us to give them time records for 25 of this large retailer stores. And what they were looking at is time rounding. And I had to do an analysis of every time entry in all of those stores. And what the Bureau of Field Enforcement investigator told me from the DLSE is if there was one instance where a team member did not get the time that they were entitled to, where they somehow lost time, you stole wages from them, I'm going to invalidate your rounding system. Now, by some miracle of the universe, there was no violation. Every single thing we looked at, it was to the team member's benefit and never to the employer's benefit. But that is rare, incredibly rare. And I think we actually got lucky because somebody retired in the middle of the audit, so nobody was paying too much attention at the DLSE. And I think I know a few things slipped through. So here's the deal. Rounding is done. Just don't do it anymore. If you have electronic timekeeping, which almost everybody does, don't program that timekeeping system to round the time, whether it's to the 10th of an hour or quarter of an hour, whatever it is. Don't do it. Pay the actual time. If you're worried about overtime, schedule them to work 7 hours and 55 minutes. Schedule them to work 7 hours and 45 minutes. I don't care. But the point is, pay them for all hours worked. Remember, unlike federal law, in California, we have no recognition of the concept of de minimis. So, under federal law, you might have an employee who leaves the office, somebody sees them leaving and says, oh, could you open the office again? I left my jacket in there. and the employee goes up and opens the office. Let's say they're the only key holder. They go ahead, they open up the office, person gets their jacket, they leave. Nobody's entitled to any extra money here. It was a minute or two. It's no big deal. In California, every second counts. So in California, that is not going to fly. So rounding, just forget about it. There are 2 cases on appeal right now to the California Supreme Court. Well, at least one where this is going to be an issue. And by everything we are seeing from this court and from other lower courts, it is going to be thrown out. It started with the See's Candy decision several years ago. You cannot round and avoid PAGA liability and general wage hour liability in most cases. You may get lucky, but probably not. So, couple things to think about. If you don't already have an electronic timekeeping system, that's fine. Just be prepared to do some math, okay? If you decide that you're going to choose one, choose wisely, do your homework, talk to people in your field, see who they use, who they think is most helpful. Remember, if you have people recording their time on their phone or their iPad, they're going to have to be paid for that. So you have to make sure you consider that. If they have to log into a computer before they start and log out at the end of the day, you've got to give them a little couple of minutes or so on each end for that, a little time. But the rounding idea, which used to be just to eliminate the math problem, is no longer viable. Now, you cannot change the past. So a lot of you may hear this podcast and say, oh, I can't believe this. All right, I finally have to make a change. But what am I going to do about everything that's happened in the past? You're not going to do a thing because you can't. Now, when you have a situation like this, sometimes, in fact, many times, the employees don't even notice. They don't notice that you're no longer rounding. They just notice how many hours they got paid for, and it's just not something that they're going to make a big deal about most of the time. Now, I can't promise you that because, as we all know, once you start making changes to these kinds of practices, you often end up with a problem in this area. You often end up with folks saying, well, wait a minute, you used to do X and now you're not doing X anymore. What's going on? I'm working with a client right now where they've hired independent contractors to do work that clearly could only be performed by employees. It's not a valid independent contractor arrangement. They've been doing it for years. They want to know how to fix the past. They can't. None of us can fix the past. We've all done things in our past that we wish we didn't do or we hadn't done. It's over, right? There's nothing we can do. All we can do is fix going forward. So you want to be strategic in how you're dealing with this issue. You don't want to just rush and say, oh, we're no longer rounding because we found out that there's a court decision and we might be doing this wrong. Obviously not. But I'm telling you, I've had clients who do exactly that. They will say, oh, well, we talked to our lawyer and the lawyer said we shouldn't do X anymore. So we're not going to do X anymore because we don't want to get sued. I mean, it's crazy. So you have to be strategic in terms of how you are handling this transition. Sometimes a good thing to do is to do these kinds of transitions when you're upgrading the system or you have another new process that the employees have to get used to. When we change policies, I often recommend doing those when the employee handbook is revised or modified. But certainly we're in a situation where we need to think about how we're going to strategically get the information out to employees. I will tell you again, in this situation, I think it is very unlikely that most employees will even notice that you've done something different. And that's fine, because when your time branding is screwed up, so is your itemized wage statement. So you've got all sorts of PAGA penalties. You've got all kinds of things going on here. So the more we can fly under the radar with this, the better. Sometimes it's helpful to do it if you're going to have a change in a payroll company, because you can say, oh, there's this new software you have to download or this new login system, and then you make the change there. You're not required to announce it because it's beneficial to the employee. So I don't recommend going and making a big to-do about this whole issue, but you do need to make a change. It's coming. I know some of you are thinking, I'm going to wait. I'm holding on. The California Supreme Court just might see it my way. Yes, that is possible. And it is also possible that I will be on the cover of Cosmopolitan magazine next month. It's possible, but it's not probable. Okay? It's just not going to happen. Not in my case, at least. So I just want you to think about this, okay? What is the purpose of having a system that you know is about to be slammed by the California Supreme Court? And I'm telling you, it's going to be. So put this on your list for 2024. I know we've been doing these webinars since January 1 of this year. Well, I mean, we've been doing them a lot longer than that. But just in this year, in 2024, I've been telling you, put this on your to-do list. Make sure you get this done. Make sure you focus on this. I know, I'm giving you too much. I get it. But I really want you to avoid the low-hanging fruit. Okay, that's the thing. That's what I want you to avoid is how can you not run afoul of those things that are pretty common in terms of claims that plaintiffs' lawyers will pursue. Now, some of you may know in California, there's a ballot measure that was now approved that will be on the ballot to get rid of the Private Attorney General's Act, which would be unbelievable because it's been a plaintiff's lawyer's treasure chest. I mean, honestly, I know so many plaintiffs' lawyers who started doing this when PAGA first passed about a decade ago. And they now have, their own private planes and they're flying all over the place. But those of us who get a settlement from a PAGA case, it's usually, $10. Or I actually got a check for 36 cents the other day from Costco for my share of a settlement. So the bottom line is it'd be great if PAGA passes. But even if PAGA passes the actual proposition outlawing PAGA passes, then we're still stuck with general wage hour liability, okay? Remember, PAGA just lets people bring a claim as a collective action. So it is not going to change rounding. That is my point. Long-winded way for a lawyer to get to the point, which is nothing coming down the pike on the PAGA proposition or anything else is going to change the problematic nature of this rounding. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you. You might work in an organization where no one will ever sue you. We all know that the labor commissioner does not do drop-by random audits. They only come audit you when there's been a complaint. And so you might skate on this. You might never have a problem. But if you do have a problem, you're going to lose. So that's why I'm telling you from a best practices perspective, we've got to stop the rounding. And just think about it from an operational perspective, right? How can you make it easy? Everything we're trying to do as employers is make things easier for our employees. It's hard to hire them. It's hard to recruit them. We want them to be happy. So try to find something that will make their life just as easy as rounding did, right? And the answer to that usually is electronic timekeeping systems. You just don't have to deal with anything else. So the lesson here is that I've been telling you about rounding for several years. I've been telling you I was worried about it. There will be a case coming down. Everything we're hearing from behind the scenes from the California Supreme Court is that they are going to invalidate rounding. So let's spend this year getting our ducks in a row, getting everything in order, making sure that we are not doing rounding. And again, even if somebody's keeping a paper time card, you can figure it out. The math isn't that bad, all right? You can do it. We can do hard things. Now, as long as we're talking about rounding, don't forget about other wage hour issues, okay? You've got to stay on top of this. I know it's so hard, and I know that people hate it, and I set up webinars and all sorts of things to help you with wage hour. Nobody ever wants to come to them, but I'm telling you, you need to learn this. Somebody in your organization has to understand how the wage hour laws apply to you. And we have a webinar coming up on August 1st. Do not miss it. 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. You definitely want to be there. We're going to talk about rounding, and we may even have the court decision by then. We're going to talk about rounding and all sorts of other best practices for wage hour issues. So I know it's hard, but folks, we can do hard things. We know that. So please think about what you're doing about rounding. Make sure you come to our wage hour webinar that's coming up there on August 1, and just keep doing a great job. Your role as an HR leader is hard. You've got a lot going on. I totally get it. We have to prioritize. We have to make sure that we're picking the things that are really worthy of our time. Wage hour compliance is definitely one of them. So don't miss the webinar. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast here today. It is so fun when I go out and I meet people who listen to the podcast. I met several folks at a conference earlier this week, and they were just so fun about, oh, we listen to you every Wednesday and we get together with a group, and it just makes my day. So I hope these podcasts are helpful for all of you. Please remember, if you have suggestions or comments, I'm always open ears. jshaw@shawlawgroup.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.